Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really zeroing in on the book of Hebrews, chapter 9 specifically.
That's right.
We're going to explore what it says about worship and, access to God in this, ancient system.
And really how the text shows this radical shift, this transformation in understanding how we approach the divine under a new covenant, a new order.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Our aim here is to unpack the details Hebrews gives us about that first covenant sanctuary, the rituals involved.
And then trace how the author presents this complete change in perspective, a totally different way of accessing God's presence.
Okay, so let's get into it. The text kicks off by describing this first covenant setup for worship. It mentions an earthly sanctuary.
Right, like a physical place. Think of it as the tabernacle, a kind of portable tent structure.
And it had specific parts, didn't it?
It did, very structured. Two main rooms, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
First, there was the outer room, often called the holy place.
Who was in there?
You had the lampstand, the table, and the consecrated bread, the showbread. These were things the priests dealt with regularly, part of their sort of daily routine.
Got it. Then there was a separation, a curtain.
Yes, a second curtain. And behind that was the inner room.
The most holy place.
Exactly. This was considered the absolute holiest space,
Yeah.
representing God's direct presence.
Mm.
And it held some incredibly significant items.
Like the golden altar of incense.
Yes, and the gold-covered Ark of the Covenant. That was central.
The ark, right. People have heard of that. What was actually in it, according to this passage?
Well, Hebrews mentions three things here. A gold jar holding manna.
Manna from the wilderness.
Right, a reminder of God's provision. Then Aaron's staff that had budded.
Which confirmed his priesthood, yeah.
Exactly. And crucially, the stone tablets of the covenant, the Ten Commandments, the law itself.
Wow. Foundational symbols.
Absolutely. And hovering above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover, or mercy seat. That's where atonement happened. The text kind of says, we can't go into all the details now, but the point is clear. This was the focal point.
So you've got this outer room for regular priestly stuff, and then this super sacred inner room behind a curtain. How did people interact with that inner space? Who could go in?
Well, that's the key. The regular priests, they only went into the outer room, the holy place, for their regular duties.
Okay.
But the inner room, the most holy place, access was, well, extremely restricted.
How restricted are we talking?
Only one person could enter. The high priest.
Just him.
Just him. And even then, only once a year.
Once a year.
And this is critical, never without taking blood with him.
Always blood.
Always. And that blood was offered first for his own sins, and then for the sins the people committed unknowingly, in ignorance.
Wow. So just think about that for a second. For the entire nation, access to God's presence, symbolically speaking, was through one guy, once a year, and it required blood. What was the point of all that restriction? What was it meant to show?
The author says the Holy Spirit was using this whole setup to illustrate something really fundamental.
Which was?
That the way into the most holy place, the way into God's immediate presence, wasn't fully open yet. Not as long as that first tabernacle system was still standing.
It was like a physical picture of a spiritual reality.
Precisely. It showed distance, mediation, the need for something more. It was an illustration for that time, as the text says.
And it also mentions that the sacrifices offered back then, the gifts and animals, they couldn't actually perfect the conscience of the worshiper, could they?
No, they couldn't. That's a crucial limitation. They dealt with outward things, ceremonial uncleanness. They made someone ritually clean, allowing them to participate in worship and community life.
So external regulations.
Exactly. Rules about food, drink, various ceremonial washings, things done to the body, and the text is explicit. These applied only until the time of the new order. They couldn't really touch the deep internal issue of guilt or a troubled conscience before God.
Which sets up a really stark contrast, doesn't it? Because this leads directly into the arrival of Christ.
It does. The text pivots dramatically. Christ comes as the high priest of the good things that are already here, or some translations say good things to come.
And he ministers in a different kind of sanctuary.
Completely different. Not the earthly tabernacle, that man-made copy. He went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle.
What does that mean, greater and more perfect?
Well, the text clarifies it's not man-made, meaning not a part of this creation. It's referring to the heavenly reality, the true sanctuary in God's presence, that the earthly one only hinted at, only shadowed.
Okay, so a heavenly reality. And the sacrifice he offered was also different, right? Not animals.
Absolutely critical difference. He didn't enter using the blood of goats and calves. like the earthly high priest did.
So how did he enter?
He entered the most holy place, the true heavenly one, once for all, and he did it by means of his own blood.
Once for all. That phrase just jumps out compared to the yearly ritual.
It's revolutionary.
And what was the result? What did that single entry with his own blood achieve?
Eternal redemption. That's the outcome stated right there.
Eternal redemption, not just covering sins for a year.
Exactly. Not temporary atonement that needed repeating, but a permanent, complete freedom from sin's penalty and power. Achieved forever.
That's a massive claim. The text then draws a comparison, doesn't it, to show how much better this is?
It does, using an argument from lesser to greater. It says, look, if the blood of animals, goats, bulls, and even the ashes from a sacrificed heifer, when sprinkled on people who were ceremonially unclean, if that had power in the old system to make them outwardly clean.
Okay, so the old system did achieve a type of outward cleansing.
Yes, for participation in that system. But then the text asks, essentially, how much more, then, will the blood of Christ achieve?
And what kind of cleansing is it talking about, if it's not just outward?
It's internal, deep. It says Christ, through the eternal Spirit, offered himself unblemished to God. And the result, his blood cleanses our consciences.
Cleanses our consciences. From what?
From acts that lead to death, or sometimes translated dead works. These are basically sins, things that produce spiritual death, separation from God, and leave behind that burden of guilt on the conscience.
Things the animal sacrifices couldn't ultimately fix.
Exactly, they couldn't reach that deep. But Christ's sacrifice does. And the purpose of this conscience cleansing isn't just relief, it's empowerment. It enables us, frees us, to serve the living God, removes the barrier of guilt and fear.
That internal cleansing is just fundamentally different, and this connects directly to the idea of a new covenant, right?
Right. The text says, for this reason, because of this superior sacrifice and its cleansing power, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant.
A new agreement between God and humanity. And what's the goal of this new covenant?
The purpose stated is so that those who are called by God can receive the promised eternal inheritance.
Eternal inheritance, not just temporary blessing.
Exactly. And how is this possible? It's because Christ has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. His death pays the price.
Wait, sins committed under the first covenant, does that mean the old system didn't really deal with sin?
That's a good question. The old sacrifices provided atonement within that specific covenant framework. They dealt with ceremonial issues and pointed forward. But they couldn't provide the ultimate, final, eternal solution to the deep problem of sin and guilt. Christ's death as a ransom deals with sin definitively, for all time, covering even the sins committed by believers before he came, demonstrating God's justice throughout history.
Okay, that makes sense. The text then uses an analogy to explain why death is necessary for this covenant.
Yeah, it uses the example of a will or a testament. It points out, quite practically, that a will doesn't actually do anything, doesn't transfer the inheritance until the person who made the will has died.
Makes sense. While they're alive, it's just paper.
Right. Death puts it into effect. And then it connects this principle straight back to the first covenant.
Saying even that one needed blood.
Yes. Even the first covenant, the author reminds us, was not put into effect without blood. It recalls that moment when Moses read the law, took the blood of calves, mixed it with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop branches, and sprinkled everything, the scroll itself and all the people.
Sprinkling the people with blood, that's intense.
Very vivid imagery. And he declared, this is the blood of the covenant.
Wow.
And it didn't stop there. Moses also sprinkled the tabernacle and all the utensils used in worship with blood.
So blood was everywhere in that system.
It underscored a fundamental principle derived from the law. Almost everything was cleansed with blood under that system. And the text states bluntly, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness.
A stark statement. But necessary for that system. Now the focus shifts again, doesn't it? From the earthly copies to the heavenly reality.
Yes. The logic is, if the copies of the heavenly things, the earthly tabernacle, needed to be purified with these animal sacrifices, then the heavenly realities themselves required better sacrifices to be inaugurated or cleansed.
Greater than animals, meaning Christ's sacrifice.
Precisely. And where did Christ go? Not into the earthly copy.
Right, we established that.
He didn't enter a man-made sanctuary, which was just a representation. He entered heaven itself.
Heaven itself.
To appear now for us in God's presence. He's there in the actual presence of God, representing those who trust in him.
And this wasn't like the high priest's yearly trip, something he needs to keep doing.
Absolutely not. The text hammers this point home. He did not enter heaven to offer himself again and again.
Unlike the earthly priest.
Exactly. Unlike the high priest who went into the most holy place year after year after year with blood that wasn't his own animal blood, the author argues if Christ needed to offer himself repeatedly,
Then he would have had to suffer repeatedly.
yes, many times since the creation of the world, it would negate the perfection of his sacrifice.
But that's not what happened.
No. Instead, the text declares he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages.
The end of the ages, like the decisive moment in history.
Right. To do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. One act, final, complete.
It's incredibly definitive. The author uses one last analogy, drawing on a universal human experience.
Yeah, a powerful one. Just as people are destined to die once and after that face judgment.
A sequence we all understand.
Right. So too, Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many.
One death, one sacrifice dealing with sin.
Exactly. And then it looks forward. He will appear a second time.
But not for the same reason.
No, not to bear sin again. That work is finished, accomplished. He will appear again to bring final salvation, the completion of it all, to those who are waiting eagerly for him.
Wow. Okay. So, wrapping up this deep dive into Hebrews 9, it paints this incredibly clear picture of transformation, doesn't it? Moving from that temporary external system
Yeah, with its restricted access, its copies, its animal blood.
to something completely different, an eternal internal reality.
Cleansing of the conscience, direct access to God's presence, all secured by Christ's single perfect sacrifice in the true heavenly sanctuary.
Eternal redemption, a cleansed conscience, direct access. Those are the huge takeaways here.
They really redefine the whole landscape of faith and relationship with God.
Definitely. So here's a thought to leave you with, something to really chew on after exploring this chapter. If access to God under that first covenant was so limited, one man, once a year, through blood and ritual and an earthly copy, what does Christ's single perfect sacrifice and his permanent entry into the true heavenly sanctuary tell you about the kind of access, the kind of immediate relationship that's possible for you right now?